So I got a speeding ticket the other day, and let me be honest, it's not the first one. I've had some trouble with that over the years, not too many times, but enough to know that it's rather embarrassing when you get pulled over. And especially when your son can see you across the freeway from where I pick him up at school and he takes video evidence of said incident and sends it to everybody you know. Well, not that that always happens, but it happened the one time. Love family. So awesome. Well, anyway, so I got this speeding ticket. And later on, as I was reflecting, I began thinking about the law and rules and regulations, and especially since that's come up in a lot of political debates and everywhere else today. I began doing and thinking about some of the importance of the rules and laws and regulations that we have in the world today. Because we need them. We need rules and we need a framework within which we can build community. Because ultimately, that's what those things are for. Creating some group norms so that we can fashion the kind of communities that we want to live in and be a part of together. So you got to have rules and laws and all that stuff. But at the same time, I also realized rules and laws and regulations, they actually don't build community. None of those things actually do anything to fashion community for themselves. They're only the framework within which communities can fashion. So I started thinking about, well, especially as Christians, what are those things that fashion the kind of communities that we want to live in and be in society today? And those are the things that are much more difficult to talk about and to handle, like compassion and mercy and forgiveness and grace. I mean, these are the actual tools that we use to build and the kinds of communities that we want to be in. They are the very things we need in order to shape these loving communities that we feel called to build. So on one hand, you need rules and regulations and laws to organize that framework, and at the same time, you need these other tools, these fruits of the Spirit, too, that are given to us to develop the communities that we want to be in. So you need both. And I think if we want to know how to use both and think about both, it's important to look at the life of Jesus and look how he does ministry, because Jesus is always kind of toeing the line. He's always questioning this rigid legalism that the Pharisees and Sadducees and all the religious elite tend to have. Because his accusation against them is that they have become so rigid in those things that they've lost the heart of what the law was about to begin with. The law was supposed to be in place so that people weren't cast out, weren't marginalized, weren't left poor and hurting and sick and on the margins by the powerful and the elite. The law was there to protect. And what he witnesses throughout his ministry is that that hasn't always been the case. In fact, the law has been used instead to lord over people, where it was never meant to do that. It was meant to protect. And so it becomes important for us, I think, today to look at the relationship between law and between grace and all these other tools that we use for building community. Because here's the thing, when it didn't work out well, Jesus always pushed up against those laws and rules. And yes, he fulfilled the scriptures, fulfilled the law in some ways, but he also reframed it. He also brought it back to what it was meant to do. And I think sometimes that's what we need to remember, is that these laws are created by us for the purpose of being able to build community with these tools. And when these laws begin to get in the way, when these laws no longer allow us to build the kind of community that we're looking for, these aren't set in stone. These are things that can be malleable and adaptable. And the heart of the law, the heart of God's love and grace can filter back into it when we remember what it's all about to begin with. So I don't think the arguments about law on one hand and then grace on the other need to be these polar opposites. They need to be in relationship and in conversation together. And one can't be neglected for the other. And we can't choose one versus the other, especially at the expense of the lowly and the lost and the marginalized, and those people that Jesus came and served and loved when society didn't. So, my friends, what kind of communities do we want to build? Because I think that's important as we begin to think about these two aspects of law and order and forgiveness and grace and mercy, and how we have conversations with those two things.